The Terran Integration Academy floated in the void like a particularly ambitious attempt at architectural diplomacy. Its gleaming corridors designed to accommodate everything from methane-breathing Zephyrians to the silicon-based crystallites who insisted on sleeping in furnaces. If there was ever a monument to the galaxy's collective optimism about interspecies cooperation, Nexus 7 was it. Complete with atmosphere processors that could shift between 17 different gas mixtures faster than most beings could change their minds about lunch. Cadet Lydia Core arrived on a Tuesday, which was unfortunate timing considering that Tuesdays were when the Academy's environmental systems performed their weekly calibration dance. The result was a symphony of hissing vents, groaning metal, and the occasional shriek from the Vorak dormitories when their sulfur levels dropped below optimal. Most new arrivals found this cacophony overwhelming or simply shouldered her regulation pack, nodded to the harried-looking Centuran desk Claire, and walked to her assigned quarters without so much as a grunt of acknowledgement. By Wednesday morning, the Academy's sophisticated monitoring systems had flagged an anomaly in Dormitory Block 7. Not the usual sort of anomaly like the time a Galtherian cadet accidentally phase shifted through 3 floors or when the Morak twins discovered that human coffee could fuel their exoskeletons for a week. No, this was far more disturbing to the alien faculty. A human had stopped talking entirely. Professor Quindar, whose 7 tentacles allowed him to grade papers, operate holographic displays, and express existential dread simultaneously, first noticed the issue. During basic Galactic protocol, the course was designed to teach cadets how to interact with different species, without accidentally starting wars, declaring mating rituals, or ordering someone's grandmother for dinner. It required extensive verbal participation, cultural role-playing, and the sort of enthusiastic discussion that made most educators feel they were making a difference in the universe. Grime Core attended every class, took meticulous notes with handwriting that would make a crystallite weep, geometric tears of joy, and participated in every exercise with mechanical precision. She simply did so without uttering a single word. Miss Core, Professor Quindart had ventured on Wednesday, his tentacles writhing in what passed for concerned confusion among his species. Perhaps you could share your thoughts on the proper greeting protocol when meeting a hive mind collective. He looked up from her notes, made direct eye contact that somehow managed to convey both attention and complete dismissal, and returned to writing. Her stylus moved across the digital pad with the sort of focused intensity usually reserved for diffusing bombs or performing surgery on particularly volatile anti-adder containment units. The professor's tentacles performed a complex dance that roughly translated to when the 7 spiraling dimensions of chaos is happening here. He tried again, this time with the sort of gentle encouragement that had worked on thousands of cadets across dozens of species. The floor is yours, cadet. No judgment here. We're all learning together in this magnificent tapestry of galactic cooperation. Gore's response was to flip to a new page and continue writing with the mechanical persistence of a mining drone. The other cadets began exchanging glances that ranged from curious to deeply uncomfortable. Vexthani, her Zerothian roommate, clicked her mandibles in what could have been amusement or impending violence. With insectoids, the distinction was often academic until someone started bleeding. By Thursday, word had spread through the Academy's gossip networks. With the efficiency of a quantum entanglement relay, the humans, those peculiar bipedal mammals who had recently joined the galactic community with all the subtlety of a solar flare, were apparently capable of simply shutting down, verbally speaking at least. The implications were deeply unsettling to species who had spent millennia cataloging the behavioral patterns of sentient life. Commander Zilf, the Academy's crystallite administrator, found herself in the unprecedented position of scheduling emergency meetings about a cadet who was by all measurable standards performing exceptionally well. Ko's physical training scores were exemplary. Her academic work was flawless, and her adherence to regulations bordered on the supernatural. She simply refused to acknowledge that verbal communication existed as a concept. Has anyone considered? Offered Dr. Franks during the emergency faculty meeting, his gelatinous form rippling with what passed for thoughtfulness among the molluscoids, that this might be some form of human religious observance. Their species has documented cases of voluntary silence for spiritual purposes. Commander Zilf's crystalline structure flickered through several colors, settling on a deep amber that indicated skeptical consideration. For an entire week, their own documentation suggests such practices rarely extend beyond a few days. Perhaps it's a mating ritual, suggested Professor Eindal, whose aven features ruffled with academic excitement. Many species undergo behavioral modifications during reproductive cycles. Humans are still largely mysterious to us. The meeting continued for 3 hours, generating 17 different theories, 43 sub-hypotheses, and absolutely no useful conclusions. Meanwhile, Core attended her afternoon combat dynamics course, where she proceeded to demolish the training scenarios with the sort of methodical efficiency that made her instructors wonder if humans came equipped with tactical computers instead of brains. Instructor Kravix, a battle-card Thorganian whose species had been perfecting the art of warfare since before most civilizations discovered fire, watched Core navigate the obstacle course with growing bewilderment. She moved through the holographic battlefield like she was following a predetermined script, anticipating threats that hadn't yet materialized and positioning herself with the sort of strategic awareness that usually took years to develop. Cadet Core, he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived more combat scenarios than most species had words for. Your tactical assessment of the final scenario, or paused at the course exit, turned to face him with that same unnervingly direct gaze, and simply walked away, not rudely. There was nothing disrespectful in her manner. She simply treated verbal communication as if it were an optional upgrade she had chosen not to install. By Friday, the Academy's psychological evaluation team had been called in. Dr. Morpheus A., the Ion whose species specialized in mental health across the galactic spectrum, attempted to conduct a standard assessment. The session lasted exactly 1 hour, during which Cores sat perfectly still, maintained appropriate eye contact, and responded to every question, probe, and therapeutic technique with a sort of serene silence usually associated with advanced meditation masters or broken communication equipment. Most fascinating, Dr. Morpheus reported to Commander Zilf afterward, his translucent form shifting through colors that indicated deep professional intrigue. Her mental patterns are completely normal for human baseline. No signs of trauma, psychological break, or neurological dysfunction. She's simply chosen not to speak. Chosen? Commander Zill's crystalline structure sparked with incredulous energy. For what possible reason that, I'm afraid, is a question only she can answer, and she's not answering questions at the moment. The weekend brought no relief. Core continued her routine with clockwork precision. Physical training at 600, breakfast consumed in exactly 12 minutes, academic courses attended with perfect punctuality, and every evening spent in her quarters, engaged in what appeared to be intensive study or meditation. Her roommate Vexani reported that Core slept exactly 7 hours per night, maintained perfect hygiene, and treated their shared living space with the sort of meticulous care usually associated with sacred temples or explosive ordnance storage. She's not ignoring me, Vexani explained to anyone who would listen, her mandibles clicking in a pattern that suggested deep confusion. She responds to everything, gestures, environmental cues, even my emotional states. She just won't make sounds with her mouth whole. The other cadets had begun treating Core like a particularly sophisticated piece of equipment that had developed an interesting malfunction. They would include her in group activities, assign her tasks, and even attempt conversations, all while gradually accepting that their human classmate had apparently decided that speech was beneath her dignity. Sunday evening brought the first signs that cause silence might have a purpose beyond driving the faculty to distraction. The Academy's long-range sensors detected an anomalous energy signature approaching from the outer rim territories. Something large, fast, and broadcasting. Identification codes that made the computer systems emit the electronic equivalent of nervous whimpering. Commander Zilf received the alert in her office while reviewing the week's incident reports, most of which concerned the ongoing mystery of the mute human cadet. The sensor data made her crystalline structure flash through a rapid spectrum of alarm colors before settling on a deep red that indicated imminent crisis management protocols. The approaching vessel belonged to a Carvex hunting pack. For most of the galaxy's civilized species, the Carvex represented everything that had gone wrong with evolution when left to its own devices. They were apex predators who had developed space travel not for exploration or trade, but because they had literally hunted their homeworld's ecosystem to extinction and needed new hunting grounds. Standing nearly 3 m tall with natural armor plating, retractable claws that could slice through starship hull material, and a pack hunting intelligence that bordered on telepathic coordination. They were the sort of species that made peaceful civilizations wake up in cold sweats. The fact that a Carvex pack was approaching the Academy could mean several things, none of them good. They might be conducting a recruitment assessment, their euphemism for determining whether the Academy's cadets would make suitable prey for their young hunters. They could be responding to some perceived territorial challenge, since Carvex considered any space within a 3-par SEC radius of their hunting grounds to be subject to their authority. Or, in the worst case scenario, they might simply be hungry. Commander Zilf immediately activated the Academy's defense protocols, which were designed more for deterrence than actual combat. The Terran Integration Academy was, after all, an educational institution dedicated to peaceful cooperation between species. Its defensive capabilities were roughly equivalent to a strongly worded diplomatic protest, backed up by some very impressive-looking energy shields. As alarms began echoing through the station's corridors, Cadet K looked up from her evening study session for the first time in 6 days. She closed her data pad with deliberate precision, stood up with the fluid motion of someone who had been expecting this moment, and walked to her equipment locker. Vexthani watched in fascination as her roommate began what could only be described as preparation for war. Core stripped out of her standard Academy uniform and began donning the sort of gear that most cadets only saw during advanced combat simulations. Every movement was economical, practiced, and carried out with the sort of calm focus that suggested this was a routine she had performed many times before. Core BXNE ventured her mandibles clicking uncertainly. The alarm, should we report to emergency stations? For a moment, it seemed like Core might actually respond. She paused in her equipment check, looked directly at her roommate, and for the first time in a week, her expression shifted into something that might have been reassurance. Then she returned to her preparations without a word. As the Academy's emergency systems continued their electronic panic, and the faculty scrambled to implement crisis protocols they had hoped never to use. Cadet Lydia Core finished her preparations and walked toward the central hub. Her week of silence was about to end, but not in any way the Academy psychological evaluation team could have predicted. The Carvex were coming, and somehow the human who had spent 7 days refusing to speak had been preparing for exactly this moment. The Academy's emergency protocols had been designed by a committee of 12 different species, each contributing their particular expertise in crisis management. The result was a system that could efficiently coordinate evacuation procedures for methane breathers, adjust artificial gravity for species whose bones would shatter under standard acceleration, and automatically translate panic into 47 different languages simultaneously. What had not been designed for was a situation where the most pressing concern was a human cadet who had apparently decided that verbal communication was optional. Commander Zilf found herself in a uniquely frustrating position of managing two crises simultaneously. An approaching Karvek's hunting pack and a faculty that seemed more concerned with Ko's psychological state than with the very real possibility of being eaten by 3M tall predators. The morning briefing had devolved into what could charitably be called an interdisciplinary debate about human behavioral patterns and less charitably described as academic panic disguised as scientific inquiry. I reviewed the literature on human silence practices Professor Quindar announced, his tentacles arranging themselves into what his species considered a posture of scholarly authority. There are precedents for extended periods of voluntary muteness, but they're typically associated with extreme emotional trauma or religious transcendence. Neither seems applicable. Here, Dr. Frank's rippled disagreement across his gelatinous surface. Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle entirely. What if this isn't pathological behavior, but rather a form of human preparation? Their species has documented cases of individuals entering altered states of consciousness before. Significant challenges. Altered states. Commander Zilf's crystalline structure flickered through skeptical orange. She's attending classes, completing assignments, and maintaining perfect hygiene. If this is an altered state, it's the most functional one in recorded galactic history. The debate continued, while the Academy's long-range sensors tracked the Karvek's vessel's steady approach. The hunting pack was maintaining a course that would bring them to the Academy in approximately 18 hours. Plenty of time for the station's defensive systems to prepare, but not nearly enough time to evacuate several thousand cadets representing dozens of species with wildly different environmental requirements. Meanwhile, the subject of their concern was demonstrating exactly why human behavioral patterns defied conventional xenopsychological analysis. Core had arrived at her advanced tactical theory course precisely on time, taken her usual seat in the third row, and begun reviewing her notes with the same methodical intensity she had displayed all week. The only difference was that today her preparations seemed to carry an additional layer of purpose that made her classmates unconsciously shift away from her. Instructor Vorak, whose species had evolved from pack hunters before discovering the joys of academic discourse, recognized the signs immediately. Core was exhibiting the behavioral patterns of a predator, preparing for a hunt, not the mindless aggression of a berserker, but the calculated focus of an apex predator who had identified specific prey and was mentally rehearsing the kill sequence. Today we'll be discussing defensive strategies against superior force multiplication. Vorak announced, his scarred hide rippling with the sort of anticipation that came from finally having a practical application for theoretical knowledge. Specifically how smaller forces can neutralize larger threats through tactical superiority and environmental manipulation. The class perked up with interest. Most of the cadets were from species that had achieved galactic civilization through diplomacy, trade, or technological advancement rather than military conquest. The opportunity to study warfare from a safe academic distance held the same appeal as watching dangerous predators from behind. Reinforced barriers caused stylus began moving across her data pad with increased intensity. For the first time all week, she seemed to be taking notes that went beyond simple transcription. Her writing became a complex mixture of diagrams, calculations, and what appeared to be tactical assessments of the classroom's physical layout. The key principle, Vorvik continued, is that superior force can be neutralized through superior positioning, timing, and understanding of environmental factors. A single well-positioned defender can theoretically defeat multiple attackers if they can control the engagement parameters. Several students raised appendages, tentacles, or other questioning extremities. Core simply continued writing, her focus so intense that the air around her seemed to thicken with concentration. Instructor Vorak ventured Cadet Schicksal, whose crystalline structure chimed with curiosity. What about scenarios where the attacking force possesses both superior numbers and individual combat capability? Theoretical, of course. Both hide darkened with what might have been amusement or predatory satisfaction. An excellent question, especially given current circumstances. When facing overwhelming odds, the defender's primary advantage becomes unpredictability. Most aggressive species rely on established behavioral patterns. They expect their prey to react in predictable ways. A defender who can break those expectations has already gained a significant tactical advantage. Co-stylist paused for the first time in the class. She looked up at the instructor with an expression that somehow managed to convey both complete understanding and grim satisfaction. Then she returned to her notes. But now her writing carried an urgency that made the surrounding air feel charged with potential energy. The class continued for another hour, covering theoretical scenarios that bore an uncomfortable resemblance to the Academy's current situation. By the time the session ended, Core had filled 17 pages with what appeared to be a comprehensive tactical analysis complete with environmental assessments, force, multiplication calculations, and what looked suspiciously like a detailed battle plan. As the other cadets filed out, discussing the lesson with the sort of academic enthusiasm that comes from studying dangerous topics in complete safety, Core remained seated. She continued, writing for another 10 minutes, occasionally glancing at the classroom structural features with an appraising eye that made instructor Vortex's predatory instincts twitch with recognition. "Cadet Core," he said finally, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived more actual combat than most species had words for. "Your analysis seems quite comprehensive." Core looked up, made that same unnervingly direct eye contact that had become her trademark, and for a moment it seemed like she might actually speak. Instead, she simply gathered her materials and walked toward the exit, but not before placing her data pad on the instructor's desk with a deliberate precision that suggested the gesture carried significance beyond simple forgetfulness. Boric examined the notes. After she left, his scarred hide rippling through colors that indicated growing respect mixed with deep unease. Coe's tactical analysis was not the work of a student studying theoretical scenarios. It was an operational plan, designed by someone who had extensive experience with asymmetric warfare and was preparing for imminent combat. The afternoon brought increasingly frantic attempts by the faculty to understand what was happening inside Core's head. Dr. Morpheus attempted another psychological evaluation, this time using advanced neural scanning equipment that could map thought patterns across most known species. The results were simultaneously reassuring and deeply disturbing. "Her brain activity is completely normal," he reported to Commander Zilf, his ethereal form shifting through colors that indicated professional bewilderment. "In fact, it's more organized than baseline human patterns suggest. She's not experiencing psychological breakdown. She's experiencing what appears to be enhanced cognitive focus." Enhanced how? Commander Zilf's crystalline structure sparked with administrative frustration. Her neural pathways are operating with the sort of efficiency usually associated with combat veterans or individuals who have undergone extensive mental conditioning. It's as if she's been preparing for a specific scenario and has now entered a state of operational readiness. The implications were unsettling. If Core was preparing for combat, it suggested she knew something about the approaching Carvex that the Academy's intelligence systems had missed. Either that or humans possessed some form of precognitive ability that had escaped detection. During their species evaluation, the evening meal period provided another opportunity for observation. Core appeared in the dining facility precisely on schedule, selected her food with the same methodical care she applied to everything else, and consumed her meal in exactly 12 minutes. The difference was that tonight her fellow cadets were watching her with the sort of fascinated attention usually reserved for dangerous wildlife. Biexani approached her roommate's table with the cautious respect of someone who had finally realized they were sharing living space with a potential apex predator. "See," she said, her mandibles clicking in patterns that indicated nervous determination. "I owe you an apology." For the first time in a week, Ko's mechanical routine faltered. She looked up from her meal with an expression that suggested genuine surprise, though she remained silent. "Last week, when you first arrived," Pixani continued, her insectoid features shifting through what passed for embarrassment among her species. "I made some comments about human weakness, about how your species seemed soft compared to others in the galaxy. I thought your silence was some form of emotional fragility." Ka's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement, though it carried undertones that made Vextoni's exoskeleton tingle with instinctive alarm. "I was wrong," Vexani admitted. "Watching you this week, I'm beginning to understand that human weakness might be the most dangerous misconception in the galaxy. You're not fragile. You're something else entirely." Core reached across the table and briefly touched Vexani's chitinous hand, a gesture that somehow managed to convey forgiveness, acknowledgement, and a warning all at once. Then she returned to her meal as if the conversation had never occurred. The Academy's night shift brought the final pieces of the puzzle into focus. Security footage from the past week revealed that Core's silence had been accompanied by a systematic study of the station's layout, defensive systems, and structural vulnerabilities. She had been conducting reconnaissance, disguised as normal cadet activities, mapping every corridor, access point, and potential tactical position with the thoroughness of a military intelligence operative. Commander Zilf reviewed the footage with growing comprehension and mounting alarm. The human cadet had spent her week of silence preparing for war, and she had done so with a level of strategic thinking that suggested extensive prior experience with exactly this type of scenario. She knew. Commander Zilf realized her crystalline structure flashing through rapid spectrums of revelation. Somehow she knew the Carvex were coming. The approaching dawn would bring the hunting pack within scanning range of the Academy's defensive systems. In approximately 6 hours, the station would face the most dangerous predators in known space, creatures that had evolved specifically to hunt sentient beings and had turned that evolution into an art form. And somewhere in the Academy's corridors, a human cadet who had spent a week refusing to speak was making final preparations for a confrontation that would redefine the galaxy's understanding of her species. Ka's silence was about to end, but the galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones that looked like prey. The Carvex hunting vessel materialized from hyperspace with the sort of dramatic flair that suggested its occupants had been practicing their intimidation techniques for generations. The ship itself was a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. Sleek predatory lines that seemed to flow like liquid metal, weapon ports that resembled gaping moors, and sensor arrays that tracked potential prey with the focused intensity of a stalking cat. And was the sort of vessel that made peaceful civilizations reconsider their commitment to diplomacy and start investing heavily in defensive weaponry. Commander Zilf watched the approach from the Academy's command center, her crystalline structure cycling through colors that would have been beautiful under different circumstances, but currently resembled a warning beacon having an existential crisis. The Carvex ship had dropped out of hyperspace exactly where their calculations predicted, which meant either their navigation was flawless or they had been monitoring the Academy long enough to plot optimal approach vectors. "Incoming transmission," announced Lieutenant Korax, whose tentacled appendages were dancing across control surfaces with the sort of frantic energy that came from operating Equipment designed by 12 different species with completely incompatible ideas about user interface design. The main display flickered to life, revealing what every sentient being in the galaxy hoped they would never see outside of documentary footage. A Carvex, pack leader in full ceremonial hunting regalia, standing nearly 3 m tall with armor plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The creature possessed this sort of presence that made evolution itself seem like a personal insult to peaceful coexistence. Academy Station. The Carvex spoke in perfectly accented Galactic standard, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had roared unintelligibly. I am Hunt Leader Vex of the Crimson Talon Pack. We have come to assess the quality of your educational program. Commander Zilp's structure flashed through diplomatic protocols while her mind raced through increasingly unpleasant possibilities. Hunt Leader Vex Koth. This is Commander Zilp of the Terran Integration Academy. We welcome your interest in our educational mission, though I should note that our facility operates under Galactic Education Consortium neutrality agreements. The Carvex's laugh was the sort of sound that made prey animals across the galaxy wake up in cold sweats without understanding why. Neutrality. Agreements. How charmingly optimistic. We have heard interesting reports about the new species you are integrating, particularly their potential as worthy adversaries for our young hunters. The transmission ended with a sort of abrupt finality that left no doubt about the Carvex's intentions. They had not come for diplomatic discussions or cultural exchange. They had come to evaluate whether humans represented suitable prey for their species. Ritualistic hunting practices, and they intended to conduct that evaluation through direct testing. Activate all defensive systems, Commander Zilf ordered, though they both knew the Academy's defenses were designed more for deterrence than actual combat. Implement Evacuation Protocol 7. Priority evacuation for non-combat species. Defensive positions for those capable of resistance. The Academy's corridors filled with the controlled chaos of several thousand beings representing dozens of species, each with different environmental requirements, mobility limitations, and panic responses. The crystallites rang like wind chimes as they moved. The gelatinoids flowed through ventilation systems, and the various humanoid species ran with the sort of purposeful terror that came from suddenly realizing they were about to become part of someone else's food chain. In the midst of this organized pandemonium, Cadet Core walked against the flow of evacuating personnel with the calm determination of someone heading to a scheduled appointment. She had shed her standard Academy uniform in favor of combat gear that looked suspiciously more advanced than anything in the Academy's standard equipment inventory. Every piece of equipment was positioned with military precision, and her movement carried the fluid confidence of someone who had done this before. Vexthani caught sight of her roommate, moving toward the central hub, and broke away from the evacuation stream. Core, she called, her mandibles clicking with desperate concern. The evacuation shuttles are departing from Bay 7. We need to move. Cole paused and turned to face her roommate. For the first time in a week, her expression held something approaching warmth, though it was the sort of warmth that came from a forge, rather than a hearth. She reached into her equipment pack and withdrew a small device that she pressed into Vexthani's chitinous hands. Emergency beacon, Core said, her voice carrying the sort of quiet authority that made the surrounding chaos seem to pause. Stay with the evacuation group. When this is over, activate it. Vexthani stared at her roommate in shock. After a week of absolute silence, Ko's first words were tactical instructions delivered with the sort of calm competence that suggested she had been planning this conversation for days. When what is over, Vexthani demanded Core. You can't possibly be thinking of 7 days, Core interrupted, her voice carrying undertones that made Vexthani's exoskeleton tingle with recognition of apex predator behavior. I spent 7 days preparing for this exact scenario. Trust me, before Vexthani could respond, Core had disappeared into the crowd of evacuating personnel, moving with a sort of purposeful stealth that made her effectively invisible despite the chaos around her. The Carvex boarding pods struck the Academy's hull with surgical precision, each one targeting a different section to maximize confusion and prevent coordinated resistance. The pods themselves were works of art, if art involved designing the most efficient possible method for delivering death into enclosed spaces. They cut through the Academy's hull, plating like heated knives through synthetic butter, depositing their occupants directly into corridors that had been designed for education rather than warfare. The first Carvex to emerge from the boarding pods found themselves in an environment that seemed almost insultingly peaceful. The Academy's corridors were wide, well-lit, and decorated with holographic displays, celebrating interspecies cooperation and galactic harmony. It was exactly the sort of soft, civilized environment that made the Carvex species feel contemptuous of their potential prey. Hunt led a Vexisk materialized in the central hub with the fluid grace of a nightmare given physical form. His pack spread out behind him. 6 experienced hunters whose combined kill count represented the extinction of several small civilizations. They moved through the Academy's corridors with the confident efficiency of apex predators who had never encountered anything resembling effective resistance action. Disappointing, Vexquith commented as his pack reported their initial reconnaissance. The prey species have fled like the weak creatures we expected. Perhaps the reports of human potential were exaggerated. The hunt began with the systematic efficiency that had made the Carvex the most feared predators in known space. They moved through the Academy's sections methodically, tracking the few beings who had been unable to evacuate and demonstrating exactly why their species had developed interstellar travel primarily as a means of finding new hunting grounds. Commander Zilf and her command staff had taken refuge in the heavily shielded command center where they watched the Carvex advance through security monitors with a sort of helpless fascination that came from witnessing apex predators in their natural element. The hunters moved with a coordination that bordered on telepathic, each one instinctively understanding their role in the pack's hunting strategy. Where are they going? Lieutenant Corex observed his tentacles tracing the Carvex movement patterns on the tactical display. They're not following standard search patterns. It's almost like they're being guided. Commander Zilf's crystalline structure flashed with sudden comprehension. The Carvex were indeed being guided, but not by their own tactical instincts. Someone was manipulating their movement through the station, using their predatory behavior patterns against them by creating the appearance of prey trails that led deeper into the Academy's interior sections. In the Academy's lower levels, Cadet Core moved through maintenance corridors with a sort of three-dimensional awareness that came from extensive urban warfare training. She had spent her week of silence, mapping every access point, structural weakness, and tactical advantage the station offered. Now she was implementing a strategy that would have impressed military commanders across the galaxy if any of them had been present to witness it. The first Carvex hunter encountered Ka in what had been the Academy's advanced physics laboratory. The creature had been tracking what appeared to be a fleeing prey signature through the lower corridors following scent trails and environmental disturbances with the focused intensity of a born predator. What found, instead, was a human cadet standing calmly in the center of the laboratory, surrounded by equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. "Ah," the Carve said, its voice carrying the sort of satisfied anticipation that came from finally locating worthy prey. "The new species. I had hoped we would encounter one of your kind." Core regarded the 3M tall predator with the same calm assessment she had applied to everything else during her week of silence. The creature was impressive. Natural armor plating, retractable claws that could slice through starship hull material, and reflexes that had been honed by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Under normal circumstances, it would have been capable of killing dozens of Academy cadets without breaking stride. These were not normal circumstances. Huntladder Vex Core said, her voice carrying across the laboratory's communication system with crystal clarity. Your pack is currently spread across 7 different sections of the Academy, each hunter pursuing individual prey trails. Standard Carvex tactical doctrine for enclosed space. Hunting. The Carvex hunter's head snapped toward her with predatory focus. You know our hunting patterns, prey. Creature. I know your species, your tactics, your behavioral patterns, and your weaknesses, Core replied, her tone carrying the sort of clinical detachment that made the laboratory's temperature seem to drop several degrees. I spent 7 days studying everything the Galactic databases contained about Carvex hunting. Methodology. You're impressive predators, but you're also predictable. The hunter's claws extended with the sort of metallic sound that had been the last thing countless sentient beings had ever heard. Predictable? We shall see. How predictable you find death, human. The creature launched itself across the laboratory with the sort of explosive speed that had made the Carvex the apex predators of their home world. Its trajectory was perfect, its timing flawless, and its killing strike positioned to end the encounter in seconds. Ko stepped aside with minimal effort, her movements so economical that it seemed almost casual. The Carvex hunter crashed into the laboratory, equipment behind her, its momentum carrying it directly into a containment field generator that had been modified during the previous week's maintenance activities. The energy discharge was brief, brilliant, and absolutely devastating. When the light faded, the Carvex hunter was unconscious, its natural armor plating scorched but intact, its breathing steady but shallow. Core had neutralized a 3M tall apex predator without throwing a punch, firing a weapon, or even raising her voice. Hunch leader, Vex Koff, she said into the communication system, her voice now carrying undertones that made the Academy's remaining occupants feel their blood pressure spike. Your hunter is alive, but incapacitated. The same fate awaits the rest of your pack if you continue this assessment. I suggest we discuss terms. The silence that followed was the sort of quiet that preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or absolutely catastrophic violence. In the command center, Commander Zilf watched her security monitors with the sort of fascination usually reserved for witnessing the birth of new stars or the collision of galaxies. A human cadet who had refused to speak for a week had just single-handedly neutralized a Carvex hunter and was now negotiating with the most dangerous predators in known space. The galaxy's understanding of human potential was about to undergo some significant revisions. The silence that followed caused transmission stretched across the Academy's communication systems like a held breath before a thunderclap. In the command center, Commander Zill's crystalline structure cycled through colors that had no names in any known language, settling finally on a deep violet that indicated the sort of profound cognitive recalibration that occurred when fundamental assumptions about reality required immediate revision. Hunt leader Vex's response, when it finally came, carried undertones that made even the Academy's automated systems seem to pause in electronic contemplation. Human, he said, his voice no longer carrying the casual confidence of an apex predator addressing prey. You speak of terms as if you possess leverage in this encounter. One of my hunters has been temporarily inconvenienced. This does not alter the fundamental nature of our assessment. Ko's laugh echoed through the laboratory's communication system with the sort of genuine amusement that somehow managed to be more unsettling than any threat could have been. Hunt leader, your remaining 5 hunters are currently pursuing prey trails through sections of the Academy that I spent the past week modifying. Would you like me to demonstrate what I mean by leverage? The tactical display in the command center suddenly blazed with activity as energy signatures flared throughout the Academy's lower levels. Each location corresponded precisely with the positions of the remaining Carvex hunters, and each energy signature indicated the activation of systems that definitely had not been part of the Academy's original design specifications. Fascinating, Professor Quindar whispered his tentacles, performing calculations that seemed to defy several laws of physics. She's been preparing the entire station as a tactical environment. Those aren't random modifications. They're components of an integrated defensive system. The first hunter to encounter cause preparations was tracking what appeared to be a wounded crystallite through the Academy's geological study section. The scent trail was perfect. The environmental disturbances exactly what a fleeing prey creature would leave, and the tactical situation seemed to offer multiple advantages for a pursuing predator. What the hunter found instead was a corridor that had been converted into something resembling a three-dimensional maze constructed from hardened energy fields and gravitational anomalies. But the Carvex's natural reflexes, honed by millions of years of evolution, proved to be precisely the wrong response to an environment where the laws of physics had been creatively reinterpreted. The hunter found itself suspended in a gravitational field that held it as gently and implacably as a parent holding a child, completely immobilized but entirely unharmed. To neutralize, Core reported with a sort of clinical precision that made her sound like a tactical computer with a personality disorder. Gravitational containment field, reversible upon cessation of hostile activities. The second hunter encountered a corridor that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. A holographic maze that exploited the Carvex visual processing system's particular vulnerabilities. The creature spent 20 minutes pursuing prey that remained perpetually just beyond reach until it finally collapsed from exhaustion in what turned out to be a circular corridor exactly 12 m in diameter. Hunter 3 experiencing sensory overload. Core continued her commentary. Holographic displacement field recovery. Time approximately 4 hours. Hunt led of Vexcoat's remaining hunters began reporting encounters that defied every tactical manual in the Carvex military archives. One found itself trapped in a temporal distortion field that slowed its movements to approximately 110th normal speed while leaving its consciousness operating at full capacity, a sensation that most beings found profoundly disturbing. Another encountered a section of corridor where the artificial gravity rotated through all possible orientations every 30 seconds, creating a combat environment that required constant three-dimensional reorientation. How? Hunt later Vexoff demanded, his voice carrying the sort of frustrated admiration that came from encountering a prey species that had somehow become the predator. How does one individual modify an entire space station in 7 days? Gora's response came from a central hub where she had apparently been waiting for exactly this question. I didn't modify the station, Hunt letter. I modified how the station's existing systems interact with each other. Every defensive measure you've encountered uses equipment that was already installed for educational purposes. I simply repurposed it. The implications were staggering. The Academy's educational equipment included gravity manipulation systems for teaching physics, holographic projectors for historical recreations, temporal mechanics laboratories for advanced theoretical studies, and energy field generators for practical engineering courses. Core had somehow integrated all of these systems into a comprehensive defensive network that turned the entire station into a weapon designed specifically to neutralize Carvex hunting tactics. Impressive, Hunt letter, Vexkoth admitted, his tone carrying the sort of grudging respect that his species reserved for worthy adversaries. But you have merely delayed the inevitable. My pack will adapt to your modifications, and you remain a single individual against 6 experienced hunters. Actually, Core replied, her voice now carrying undertones that made the Academy's environmental system seem to hum with anticipation. I'm a single individual who has been preparing for this exact scenario since I was 12 years old. And your pack isn't adapting. They're being systematically neutralized by equipment they don't understand in environments they can't predict, using tactics their evolutionary programming never prepared them to counter. The final hunter encountered Core in person in the Academy's main gymnasium where she had apparently been waiting. The creature approached with the sort of cautious respect that came from witnessing the fate of its packmates, but its predatory instincts remained intact. The Carvex were apex predators by evolution and training. They did not retreat from individual combat regardless of the tactical situation. Human, the hunter said, its claws extending with ceremonial precision. You have proven yourself a worthy adversary. I offer you the honor of single combat, according to Carvex tradition. Core regarded the 3M tall predator with the same calm assessment she had applied to everything else during the past week. I appreciate the offer, she said, her tone suggesting genuine respect. But I'm not interested in honor. I'm interested in ending this encounter with minimal casualties and maximum educational value. The hunter's charge was everything the Carvex species represented: explosive speed, perfect coordination, and the sort of focused lethality that had made them the terror of civilized space. Its approach was flawless, its technique beyond reproach, and its execution worthy of the greatest hunters in galactic history. Core stepped into the charge rather than away from it, her movement carrying the sort of fluid precision that suggested extensive training in close-quarters combat. Her right arm intercepted the hunter's attack with a technique that redirected the creature's momentum while simultaneously targeting specific pressure points in its nervous system. The entire encounter lasted approximately 3 seconds, ending with the Carvex hunter unconscious on the gymnasium floor and Core standing over it without apparent exertion. Hunt, leader vexed, she said into the communication system, her breathing barely elevated. Your entire pack has been neutralized using non-lethal methods. I could have killed them. The Academy's modified systems include several lethal options that I chose not to employ. This demonstration should provide sufficient data for your assessment of human potential. The silence that followed stretched across several minutes, during which the Academy's occupants held their collective breath and wondered whether they were about to witness the first diplomatic breakthrough between humans and Carvex, or the beginning of an interstellar war that would make previous conflicts seem like academic debates. Human Hunt, led of Vexikov, finally responded, his voice carrying tones that suggested his worldview was undergoing significant structural modifications. Your species presents unexpected characteristics. We came to assess your potential as prey for our young hunters. Instead, we have encountered a predator that surpasses our own capabilities through methods we do not comprehend. We're not predators, Core replied, her voice carrying the sort of patient explanation usually reserved for teaching complex concepts to particularly slow students. We're problem solvers. The Carvex represent a problem, specifically the problem of how to neutralize superior force through superior preparation and tactical thinking. I spent 7 days studying that problem and developing solutions. Commander Zilf chose this moment to rejoin the conversation, her crystalline structure now displaying colors that indicated diplomatic opportunity mixed with profound relief. Hunt Leader Vexcott, perhaps we could discuss this situation in a more formal setting. The Academy would be honored to host further cultural exchange between our species. The Carvex leader response carried undertones of what might have been amusement. Commander, I believe our assessment has provided sufficient data. The human species possesses potential that exceeds our initial projections. We withdraw our evaluation with considerable respect for your educational program. The Carvex withdrawal was conducted with the same efficiency that had characterized their arrival, though their departure carried an entirely different emotional resonance. Instead of disappointed predators abandoning inadequate prey, they resembled students who had just encountered a teacher whose lessons would require significant time to fully comprehend. as the Carvex vessel disappeared into hyperspace. The Academy's corridors filled with returning personnel who regarded Core with a sort of awed fascination, usually reserved for natural phenomena or minor deities. The human cadet, who had refused to speak for a week, had single-handedly neutralized the most feared predators in known space, and she had done so using educational equipment and tactical thinking rather than superior firepower. Core, Vexpani said as a roommate returned to their shared quarters. I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll actually answer this time. Core looked up from securing her equipment with the same methodical care she applied to everything else. What would you like to know? The silence. Vexani said, her mandibles clicking with curiosity that had been building for 8 days. Why did you stop talking for an entire week? Expression shifted into something that might have been embarrassment mixed with tactical assessment. Because you said humans were weak, she replied. And I realized that our apparent weakness might be our greatest strategic advantage. Most species in the galaxy assume that quiet, peaceful behavior indicates vulnerability. I wanted to test whether that assumption could be weaponized. Weaponized? Vexani's exoskeleton rippled with what passed for incredulous amusement among her species. The Carvex came here expecting to find soft, civilized prey, COR explained. Instead, they encountered a predator who had been using their own assumptions against them. The week of silence wasn't preparation for combat. It was preparation for psychological warfare. I'll let everyone, including potential threats, believe that humans were exactly as harmless as we appear. The implications were staggering. Core had spent her week of silence, not just preparing defenses, but conducting a comprehensive psychological operation designed to maximize the tactical advantage of being underestimated. She had weaponized the galaxy's assumptions about human weakness and turned those assumptions into a strategic asset. Commander Zilf's subsequent report to the Galactic Education Consortium became required reading for xenopsychology students across the galaxy. The document, officially titled Reassessment of Human Behavioral Patterns Following Carvex Encounter, became known colloquially as the Silent Predator Analysis and fundamentally changed how other species viewed human potential. The Academy implemented new training protocols based on what became known as cause methodology. The strategic use of apparent weakness to mask tactical preparation. Students from dozens of species began practicing extended periods of focused silence, though none achieved the sort of comprehensive system integration that Core had demonstrated. 6 months later, when asked about her week of silence during a galactic conference on interspecies relations, Core's response became one of the most quoted statements in diplomatic history. We spent millennia learning that the most dangerous predators are often the ones that look like prey. We just never mentioned that we were talking about ourselves. The galaxy's understanding of human potential had indeed undergone significant revision. The species that had appeared soft, peaceful, and diplomatically inclined turned out to possess a capacity for strategic thinking that bordered on precognitive. More importantly, they had demonstrated the ability to turn their apparent weaknesses into tactical advantages through preparation, patience, and the sort of comprehensive planning that most species associated with military high command rather than individual cadets. The Terran Integration Academy continued its mission of fostering interspecies cooperation, but with a new understanding that sometimes the most effective diplomacy involved demonstrating exactly why warfare would be inadvisable. And in Dormitory Block 7, Cadet Core returned to normal conversation patterns, though her fellow students never quite forgot that their quiet, methodical classmate had once neutralized an entire pack of apex predators without raising her voice. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about making assumptions based on appearances. Humans, it turned out, were exactly as dangerous as they appeared to be, which was to say not at all, right up until the moment when they absolutely